Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Film School podcast this Wednesday, the 4th of November 2020. How's everyone going today?
Yeah, going well, thanks, Adam.
That's good.
Too
That
bad.
is none other than at J Luke. We also have that just at the very end there was MJP74 on Letterboxd. Emily, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
And then we also have Chris Birchie, the rom-com expert, which is being awfully silent. And you could follow him at Birchie84. How you doing, Chris?
That was great, mate. It was seamless intro.
Thank you. We also have a very special guest today at FNHPaul. How you doing, Paul?
Oh, I'm doing well. How about yourself, my man?
Yeah, doing pretty good. Can't complain. So, Paul, why don't you just give us a little bit of an introduction on who you are and...
All right, I'll tone down the Billy Mays with it, but hello, I'm your friendly neighborhood Paul. I am a Twitch streamer. I do a variety of different games, typically focusing on RPGs. I am your favorite American Englishman, strictly because I'm probably the only American who lives in England that you may know about.
Exactly.
And that is just a little bit of me. I have a shtick online of wearing nothing but Hawaiian shirts on camera, mostly because they fit my form better. We're just gonna go with that.
And he's also...
And I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. He's also an Englishman who can't, an American Englishman who can't drink properly. You can follow us on, and we'll have
Trying to start a war here.
So, for those of you who don't know, Film School Podcast is a podcast where we talk about the films that we've watched throughout the week. We have slightly changed the format for today. We are talking about 3 films: JoJo Rabbit, Sorry to Bother You, and Heartbreak Ridge. You can follow us on Instagram at Film School Pod and Twitter as well. We've now consolidated and changed those names. So let's jump into the first film. JoJo Rabbit. So JoJo Rabbit is directed by Taika Waititi. It was released on the 18th of November 2019. It stars Taika Waititi himself, Scarlett Johansson, Roman Griffith Davis, Thomasin McKenzie, Sam Rockwell, Stephen Merchant, and Rebel Wilson, just to name a few. It won an Academy Award for the best writing of an adapted screenplay. It had a budget of $14 million and a box office of $90.3 million USD. So, what did everyone think of this film?
Have you got a plot outline for this one?
Yeah, so I'll quickly just do a quick plot outline. So this movie is a World War II satire, which follows a boy, so a lonely German boy, whose worldview is kind of turned upside down from his imaginary friend, who is Adolf Hitler, of all people. His mother also is hiding a young Jewish girl in the attic, and it's the kind of story of JoJo trying to confront his blind sort of patriotism towards Adolf Hitler. So that's the kind of main storyline there.
Adam, I think you might have been the only one who had seen this multiple times.
Yeah, so I've seen this 3 or 4 times at this stage.
What?
Yeah, so I saw it initially, I think, with Emily way back when it came out in theaters.
Not me.
Wasn't it with you and Ben?
No.
Well, I'm mistaken then. Yeah, and then I've watched
Turns out I haven't seen it.
And then I've watched it a number of times. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I quite like Taika Waititi's humor, and I feel like this one sort of maybe has a little bit more heart to it, and a little bit more seriousness, especially around like the center of the film. Yeah, what were you guys' thoughts? Like, as people who have seen it, like I guess like on rewatch, I find it a little bit more boring, and some of the jokes don't land as well as I thought they did the first time. But what were you guys thinking?
I think I sort of went in with an idea of what this was going to be, and it wasn't quite that. In a good way, actually, because everything you heard about this movie is, it's a comedy about a boy with an imaginary friend who's Hitler. And you're like, oh, okay, that's a interesting concept. Obviously, we're going in for some form of satire here, but they approach it really well, and they use it really well, and Taika's very good in it as well. I think, as usual, the person who stole every scene he was in was Sam Rockwell. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. And I did like this. There was something missing, and yeah, maybe it was pulled up as well on a sort of enjoyment per minute basis as most of his films do, but it had a lot of good messaging, and I think sort of there wasn't much controversy around this movie, but the slight controversy around it being a comedy set in sort of Nazi Germany, this has always been a good spot to satire. I mean, Charlie Chaplin did it during the time, so it just because it hasn't been done since doesn't mean it doesn't work. And this is a great setting to tell a story of prejudice and sort of nature versus nurture and the blind propaganda we follow, and that was followed by an enormous amount of people. And I think Tiger does a good job of showing the stupidity of it all and how silly it all is.
Yeah, because it's like a fine line between like making fun of like Nazi Germany and like all the radicalism about it, and then also like making it comedic. Yeah,
correct.
So
and make it into a joke of sorts.
And I think that he's probably one of the only actors that could write a script like this and make it work, because that's just sort of his humor. All right, Emily and Chris, what were your thoughts? And of course, Paul.
Yeah, for me personally, I don't know. I think Josh, I might have gone in like expecting something out of it, which it didn't deliver. And like I still liked it, but it didn't have. It was missing something. Like I don't know, maybe it was a bit of like heart or a bit of like magic or something. I don't know. But yeah, like during it, I was kind of like, oh yeah, like this is a nice time, I guess. But like I'm not that invested, I suppose. I really loved like Scarlett Johansson's acting. I really liked her character in general. Like Josh already said, Sam Rockwell was great as well. And even like the child acting was really good. So I don't quite know like where it's lacking for me, but just it was just missing something, I guess.
Yeah, I reckon I'm pretty similar too with that. The acting was really good, and there was just a couple of times where I did, as Adam said, just felt like it sort of slowed down and dragged a little bit. I think the messaging is really good though, at least in the movie. A couple of things that I suppose liked was I really liked the his name was Yorkie, the other child, so not the main character, the other kid. Yeah. Thought he was quite amusing how he becomes the in the army at 11, and he's got a rocket launcher and shoots that by accident. And there was quite a few humorous scenes with him in there. So I did like it. I did watch it just after watching Borat. So the Jewish insults were, very similar, which is kind of disturbing in itself, that, it actually was how people were talking about Jewish people in this time. But yeah, another line I thought was quite amusing was, again, that Yorkie kid, when he's saying that the only people that are on their side still at this stage were like the Japanese. And he's like, but I don't think they look very Aryan. So
that was a good line, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was quite a amusing line there. But what did you think, Paul?
I really enjoyed the movie. From the way, just even the way it starts, you have, because everything that I've seen, of World War II and Nazi Germany, it's always very like, very fatherland angry, like, ooh, look at the bad guys, and then the way they frame it here with an almost like Beatles-esque intro, where it's like, oh no, he's actually loved. Like, he wasn't as feared as everyone else portrayed it to be, and of course there is a level of fear there as well, but it was like people loved him, and like the way they bolstered him up, and the way they're talking about, he had oh god, I forget the exact line, but it was like bomb-proof legs, and I pretended dead, and then it was just like scenes like that where that is what a kid would think, because we have stuff like that where whether it be a superhero or something like that, where these kids will idolize these people because it's like, oh, obviously he can do that because he's got superpowers, mind powers that will allow him to beat the enemies and all this other stuff, and how people buy into the own hype. And like you guys were saying, the acting was phenomenal. Scarlett Johansson carrying this. I really liked how she was portrayed in this movie as somebody who was putting on a brave face, even though she didn't want to do it. Like, there's 1,000 other things she'd want to do, but she can't break down because that's not her job, and she has to stay strong for not only her son downstairs, but for the girl upstairs as well.
My favorite one of those sort of Hitler-esque lines was when Stephen Merchant's character says, "You may have heard a rumor that Hitler only has one ball. That's a lie. Hitler has 4 balls." And like, you get that idea of, it's funny because you watch this and you think, oh, how silly is that someone will believe? But we still hear reports of people believing things like this in North Korea. So this isn't so far off. Like, oh, ha ha ha, look how silly people were in the past and how blinded they were by their governments. Like, people are still going through similar forms of this, obviously not to this extent and this sort of mass hysteria, but there is definitely some form of current social parody that was happening here. And I like that it sort of showed you that, I mean, we always think, if you even think about Germany in World War II, you think Nazis and you think, oh, how terrible were they? But you don't think that they were just normal people in Germany. And I think this film does a good job of exploring the difficulties that would have been to be a German who didn't agree with the cause, which would have been a lot of people on a moral compass anyway.
Yeah, and I will say that I really quite liked like the main kid, Roman Griffith Davis. Like, this was his first role, but I thought he really portrayed like someone who was like going through the motions and understanding that like maybe what he's being told is not like what should be the law and what should follow. And I think just his acting alone was just spectacular, especially for his like debut. And of course that was carried a lot with Scarlett Johansson, but I feel like as a standalone, like, he was pretty darn good.
I must admit, all the child acting in this was way above par. Like, there wasn't, because we've said it on the show before, child acting tends to get scrutinised a lot harsher, but in this case, there was nothing to scrutinise. They were every bit their characters, and they did pull off the emotional connection to a certain extent that you needed to carry the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might also have been just because of who they were bouncing off of. So, I mean, you had Rome bouncing off of Scarlett Johansson, Taika Waititi, Sam Rockwell. So he can kind of bounce it off of those guys. And even when it was just, I'm blanking on Yorkie's name now, Archie something, the other child actor.
Yes, yeah, I'll look it up.
Yorkie. But even when they're bouncing off of that, you do genuinely feel like it's just 2 kids who are like, it's like, oh, I found a Jew upstairs. Like, oh, really? Oh, yeah, we found one out in the woods. It didn't really look all that different. It was just like, yeah, that's 2 kids just having a conversation. Like, that's very much like,
Yeah.
Hey, I found this cool thing. I also found this cool thing.
Archie Yates is his name.
Okay, Archie Yates there.
I'll tell you what I found funny, because just looking through the cast, I found it so hilarious that Alfie Allen is in this movie to play a Nazi who just doesn't say anything. And he just stared to the back, and you're like, oh, that's Theon from Game of Thrones. I wonder what he'll do in this film. The answer's stand in a Nazi uniform and walk in a few doors. I couldn't understand why they cast someone of note to play that role.
Maybe he just wanted to be part of it.
Maybe he just wants to be a Nazi.
Maybe he just wanted to be Rockwell's possible lover. We don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
It's like
I'm not a fan of Alfie Allen. So.
It's like Ed Sheeran actually getting a part on Game of Thrones as well. Just throw someone in there.
He's sitting around a campfire, looks at the camera once, and that's it.
Yeah.
I was.
Does anyone have anything else to add on JoJo Rabbit, or should we shuffle along to Sorry to Bother You?
I would definitely recommend it. I mean, there's probably not many people listening to this that haven't seen it who are real film people, but it is good and it deserved the praise that it got.
I will say that, like, I think what, like, this time rewatching it, what dampens my experience was probably because I've spent like a lot of this year rewatching all of Taika's other movies, and I think that you're just in for a very different experience if you're watching JoJo Rabbit compared to What We Do in the Shadows, and like Ragnarok and a few of his other films like The Wildebeest. It's I feel like those other movies tend to have like a little bit more. Yeah,
There is
something.
one thing I'll add because I think this sort of works into your point. I think this felt more like a Wes Anderson film than it did a Taika Waititi film, and I don't know if anyone Anderson, but the color palette was very similar. The sort of acting style was very similar. The relationship between characters was very similar to the way Wes Anderson builds a film. He's the director of the Grand Budapest Hotel, Moonrise Kingdom, The Royal Tenenbaums, The Life Aquatic, things such as those. And when I was watching, I felt like, oh, this feels like a Wes Anderson film not made by Wes Anderson. And it's just lucky that it had someone as good as Taika to make up the slack. But yeah, it just felt slightly out of place, I guess, as you said, with the rest of the dialogue.
How deep into spoilers are we allowed to go here?
At this
Or do we
point,
keep-
I think that like this came out last year. I'm pretty comfortable with going full spoilers.
Well, if anyone doesn't want it spoiled, just skip forward a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I think just the way this movie handles a lot of those adult themes in a quote unquote comedy, which kind of turns into this coming of age thing. You know, when you see, you know, Scarlett Johansson's shoes there, which they made a point to show those off a few times with her dancing, and you know, we dance because we're free. And then you have all of these other things. You know, Sam Rockwell's character, who he starts off in the beginning, he is, you know, the typical German captain, and then as moves on, you see like he's slowly kind of losing faith in the fatherland or losing faith in the Nazi Party, because obviously him and Finkel, or Alfie Allen's character, are, you know, presumed to be in a relationship. And then you just have all of these other little tidbits where, you know, like I said, Rockwell's character makes that turn to let I'm blanking on her name, the one who played the
girl, yeah.
Elsa?
Elsa is her name in the movie.
Manson Mackenzie.
Okay, thank you. Where she's like, you know, oh, I was May 1st, and then she goes into the wall and she's freaking out. And he's like, I said, it's May 7th. It's May 7th. Like they totally knew. They totally knew. I'm so screwed. And then, meanwhile, Rockwell's like, no, I don't care. Like he knew from the jump that it was like, your sister's not alive. But of course, the other Nazis in there didn't know that. And then it's, you know, just the way that scene builds, and you have this moment of like, okay, what's happening? And he makes a point not to show it to, you know, the other people there.
I think, yeah, that scene was probably my favorite scene in the whole movie, at least from a dramatic standpoint, because clearly I'm glad this is a movie where they actually followed through on all the foreshadowing they did to character changes, as opposed to just having Sam Rockwell be this random, like, full Nazi through the whole thing to make a change halfway through. And I know that was a criticism of one of his characters in another film, but here they did it in a way where you're like, this guy's clearly disenfranchised. This guy's clearly seeing that what his country is doing is bullshit, but he doesn't really have a choice at the moment, or else he's going to die. And that is, I like the tension built in that scene is very good. And I like the fact that they had the Stephen Merchant's Gestapo, who were just complete frat boy style idiots who were laughing at their own jokes and everything like that. And to just show the sort of difference between the more level-headed characters and the more sort of, we're the top of the classroom, where the people who are obviously only in a position of power because they have power. And yeah, effective.
Yeah, and it was just that whole scene where it's just like they go in there and it's like, well, wait a minute, who called them in? Like who did this? And then and then you have that scene, and that was just, I had a bad feeling it was coming with the butterfly. I was like, no, don't walk towards. I remember vaguely what's over here. No, and then it happens, and you're just like, oof.
My guess was when I was sitting at the table having dinner, when she's like, when they were talking about her going out and not staying there for the night, I was like, oh no. She's because at this point you clearly know she's trying to help a cause, and yeah, I just got that bad feeling in my stomach. I'm like, I have a feeling I know where this is going to go, and yep, they definitely followed through.
Yeah, just
All
doing
right.
what you can. Yeah, we can move
So I
on.
think that's a pretty good place to stop the spoilers. And let's highly recommend that you go and check out JoJo Rabbit if you haven't seen it. I think like that's a unanimous thought.
Yeah.
All right, jumping on to the next film. The next film is Sorry to Bother You, directed by Boots Riley and stars Lakeith Stanfield, Tessa Thompson, Terry Crews, Armie Hammer, has the voices of Patton Oswalt and quite a few other people. It had a budget of 3.2 million and a box office of 18.3 million. And it was released in 2018. Do you want to take away with the plot?
Yeah, so Sorry to Bother You is a 2018 black comedy drama satire that follows Cassius Cash Green. And yes, that name is very symbolic when it comes to the plot. Cash is living in his uncle's garage with his girlfriend, who is an artist. Her name's Detroit, and he has endless money problems. The film starts off with a marketing firm, and to start with, it goes as well as you can imagine. It's not until old telemarketing veteran Langston imparts some wisdom on our protagonist, more specifically, the idea to use a quote-unquote white voice when talking to the potential customers, that Cash starts to succeed in the game. However, Cash is torn between wanting to do a good job, to do good at his job, and wanting to support his friends in a strike against the company for better working conditions. This all takes place in a world that is, in a lot of ways, run by eccentric playboy billionaire Steve Lift, who runs Worry Free, which is a work-life commitment-based system where citizens agree to lifelong working contracts in exchange for housing and food. This creates a schism between Cash and his friends, as it seems that he only cares about doing the right thing if he himself benefits from it. And I suppose that's probably where I should leave it for a spoiler-free recap of this film.
All right, so
I was
yeah, go for it.
I was going to say I really liked this film. I didn't look at any plot summaries or anything beforehand. It was just a good film. It has some good morals at the end of it. Like it's sort of trying to bring those morals out. The actual the capitalism and that sort of thing within there, and slavery and all those sort of things. Obviously, it's working to expose that, I suppose. But I can't remember the name. I think Josh said it before. How do you say it? Equestrians?
Equisapiens.
Equisapiens, yeah. So that's a ridiculous plot line, but it actually is quite amusing that these hybrid people, I suppose, are they're more muscular, they can work longer, so therefore make more money for the big companies. I suppose my main highlight of the movie I did like was, I'm trying not to spoil too much, but when Cassius exposes what's happening and exposes it to everyone, so goes on the news, exposes all the bad things that are happening. Then there's a scene very close after that where it's got the owners of the company. And it's them all celebrating because the share price has just rocketed because, everyone's like, oh, these guys are doing such an awesome job. Yeah, so that was probably a funny sort of take on how society works.
So did you guys all like it? Just quickly?
Fan, yeah. I thought it was like a really weird time, but a good one. I had a lot of fun with it. I think, just as it was starting to get just a little bit like stale in the middle, there was a little bit of, a lot of a twist, which, kind of drew me back in. And, I thought it was a really powerful social commentary.
What about you, Paul?
Yeah, I did. I liked it as well. It was, just like Emily was saying there, like just as you're like, all right, I see where this movie's going, it then takes just a hard ride onto what, and then, and then it just continues down this very just bonkers storyline that you're like, okay, wasn't ready for this, but here we are.
It's like literally my Letterboxd review, Paul. All I've written is like bonks. It's just, Crazy time.
So like, okay, so yeah, I've been sort of asking like why you guys liked it because I didn't really love it. I was probably maybe not the week to watch a film like this. For me, it was just I just couldn't. I think it was just it took itself so serious. Well, not seriously, but like, what am I trying to say? I guess I just wasn't really keen on like a movie with this sort of like content at the time. I think that like we've finished lockdown and like we've literally been watching so many like politically focused movies and so heavily like society like this is what's messed up and this just sort of fed right into that and I honestly like was getting really frustrated by like the look of the film and like how saturated everything was and the fact that every single shot seemed to have a vignette at the top and the bottom and like they were blurred and only the center was focused. And I understand like that works for some people, but for whatever reason, like this movie did absolutely zero for me. And when the horse people came in, I was like, okay, I don't know why like this is happening and I don't really care. I think that was like where I sort of sat.
So Adam sits in the thing of I
get
ignored all.
I get what it was trying to do, and I understand like the criticism of like society and like I don't know the capitalism and all that sort of stuff. But I don't know this like I think it's the fantastical elements ruined it for me. I think the way that the film sort of set itself up right up until like the white man voice came in was like like I thought that the like that concept was good, but as soon as it went like crazy like fantastical with like that was where I was out because I could understand like the white man voice side of things, but I think as soon I just personally didn't enjoy it for whatever.
I reckon I got to the 45-minute mark, and I reckon I was similar to I think Emily or someone else said it, where I was like thinking, oh, where is this going? Like I'm a bit over it now. And then that scene where he goes in the wrong door happens.
Yes.
And he's just there's all the again the Equio sapien people in there, and it just went messed up. And sometimes that can make the movie you go, oh, okay, this movie's stupid. But for some reason this time I was like, okay, I'm back on now.
Well, I think that it worked because they had a reason for it too.
Yeah.
Like, it
Explained
really,
it too, I felt.
Yeah, I think that everything here was sort of, it was almost, it didn't sort of veil its social commentary. It spoon-fed it to the audience, but it did it in such a way that I felt it remained entertaining throughout. And there's a lot more criticisms here than just on capitalism and society. And there's a lot of criticisms that I thought that Adam, you may have actually agreed with in terms of there's a massive thing about like false pariahing and like false activism.
Sorry,
and how that in and of itself is always done for financial gain with the whole can sponsorship and everything.
Yeah, and sorry, don't get me wrong. I really like think that like that's why I gave it a 3 stars because there was definitely like elements that I enjoyed. I just think it just hit at the wrong time. I liked the messaging that it was given. I also thought that the way it sort of sold you the fact that like corporations maybe plan for things. So like it makes you really question like whether like the riots that are currently happening in society, like whether corporations plan ahead and have like a plan for that. Because that was sort of like with the whole the horse people, like he was planning for it to get leaked so that the stocks jumped up. Like
yep.
That like don't get me wrong, like that was all really great. Again, I'm fairly sure it's just a time and a place. Like I just wasn't feeling it at this time. I feel like you need to. I don't know. I don't know. That's all I've got to say. I don't think that like my value, like what I'm trying to say is valuable right now as someone who wasn't into the film to begin with.
You sound so dejected about it too.
I think all right.
You didn't like the movie. It's fine.
As a caveat, like I feel like this week and watching films, like I just wasn't in the mood I just wasn't in the mood for films. I didn't want to watch them. I didn't want to. So like, I think like I really wanted something lighthearted and like fun. And
Holidate.
This was sort of lighthearted
Yeah.
and fun for at least half of it.
I was gonna say, I was like,
I didn't find this heavy at all.
so this
Like,
is the all right. My favorite part of this film was definitely when he snorts the 2-foot line of cocaine. I thought that was really fun. I don't know where you got like because I think that the issue was as well is you said don't go into it knowing what the story is about, but also it's a lot of fun. When does the fun start? When was the fun? Like, can you
Well,
guys
I
explain
think-
to me?
I think all of us sort of had fun through most of it, from what I'm hearing.
Okay.
It was a good film. I just think it was an intelligent way to sort of send the messages that it's trying to send, and this sort of hit in the not when we've watched, but in the peak of Black Mirror. And I think with a lot of the things that I've watched previously that do feel like Black Mirror episodes, this is one of the more entertaining ones. And I don't know, it picks up in the second half again, as we've all stated, and yeah, I really liked it. And I like the way this approaches the way it tackles its themes too. Like, it doesn't just sort of take one side. It shows that there's bullshit hypocrisy on all sides, and you have to deal with your own personal hypocrisy before you start dealing with the hypocrisy of society. And I think and I just like the idea of, I know I'm getting onto like 7 different topics at the same time, but how they really draw in the idea of criticizing the standard working hierarchy structure and the bullshit that we've all subscribed to of you go to your job and you put in the hours and then you get paid. So maybe one day you might be able to put in more hours to get a little bit more pay so you can not enjoy your pay again, and you don't get to hang out with your friends, but it's okay because you're succeeding in life, that sort of thing. And it really got that message across really well to me as well.
I will say, as far as like the kind of lighter, funnier times, was when Cassius and I believe the friend Salvador, when he's like kind of walking in the building and they have essentially a compliment off.
Yes, that's
Like they're going back and forth, and it reminded me of the Ultimate Rap Battle 3, where it was like Martin Luther King versus Gandhi, where it's just like, I hope you have a good day. I hope you have a phenomenal week. I hope all your adventures this month are phenomenal. I think you're going to do a lot of great things. And it's just like, they keep going off with that until Danny Glover has to step in. It's like, all right, back up.
And another thing, Danny Glover got in and I'm too old for this shit in here. And I don't know if anyone noticed, but he definitely stuck it in there.
Yeah, and he definitely they definitely threw him like a motherfucker like 20 times in 1 minute scene, which was like, I don't know, maybe I guess like that's not my humor at all. Just like compliment offs like that, I did not find that entertaining at all. I was like, this is lame.
Well, it was more of they were just like, they're not trying, because obviously like they want to not be doing that, but
Of
obviously
course.
like it's just that passive aggressive that you do at work, where it's like you see that person at work and you just want to hit them in the face, but you know, like, I got to keep this job. So you're just like, you know what? Have a good afternoon. It's like, you don't mean those words.
It definitely reminded me of a Key and Peele skit, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. It's just stuff like that.
All right, so that was Sorry to Bother You, and now we're on to. Are you guys happy to end there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, let's jump into the final movie of the week, Heartbreak Ridge, released on December 5th, 1986, produced and directed by Clint Eastwood, also starring Clint Eastwood, Mario Van Peebles, Marsh Mason, and Everett McGill. It had a budget of $15 million and a box office of $121.7 million. Do you want to take us away with the plot?
Cool. So basically, we have Marine Sergeant Thomas Highway, who is Clint Eastwood's character, and he is this decorated veteran of 2 wars. On his last posting before he retires, he's ends up being in a situation where he's surrounded by officers with no combat experience, who actually view him as being a bit of an oddball, maybe even dangerous because he's got different, I don't know, views, I suppose. And yeah, he's assigned to train a group of undisciplined recruits, including Corporal Stitch Jones, who is this hustler, and I don't know, he thinks he's a bit of a rock star as well, who he's previously encountered. And yeah, basically we see a lot of him trying to prepare these younger men for a war, which they are, kind of indifferent about. They don't really think it's going to actually come. As that's happening, the US invades Grenada.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
What did everyone think of this?
So yeah, full disclosure, this was a movie that I picked based off of because I was like, oh, I haven't seen this movie in a while, but it's one of like my favorite kind of like just go back to movies. And then that was when I picked it. And then after I picked it and started watching it again, I was like, this movie might not have been the best to have a bunch of Australians watch.
Why is that?
Strictly because I don't know, because I'm in the military. I'm not a Marine. I'm in the United States Air Force. But it's just I mean, it's funny having this movie and then Sorry to Bother You and JoJo Rabbit, where, this is pretty much a propaganda film for, the long and short of it. And with all the things that are said in this movie between the military vernacular and just the general how, Gunny Highway treats his men and treats his higher ups, it's one of those things that I realize probably doesn't translate well to people in other countries / not in the military. But I am very interested to see what you guys thought of it.
Well, it's interesting that, like, straight up you've said it was a propaganda movie because, like, I don't know, when I finished this and even during it, I was like, I'm not sure what I'm meant to be thinking or feeling. Like, I was quite confused, and I just thought, like, I didn't mind it. Like, I don't know, it probably was a little bit too long for me, and I was, like, a little bit bored about halfway through. But yeah, like, even at the end, I was like, was that just meant to be, like, a bit of fun? Or, like, I don't know, like, I was very unsure about how Eastwood intended for me to feel by the end of it.
I think you'd be quite surprised in terms of what you were saying, Paul, because I would say a lot of our idea of the army through the media would come from an American point of view because we don't make too many war films in Australia. Like, we've got a couple, and we've got a couple of big battles we learn about in school, but most of the media that we consume in terms of war is American. And I can definitely see why this was one of your favorites as a kid, because growing up with my dad, we used to watch all the Dirty Harry movies, and we're big Clint Eastwood fans. And I know we were saying before the podcast you could have picked a Western because I'm huge on the Sergio Leone spaghetti Westerns with Clint Eastwood as well. And this movie is carried by Clint Eastwood just being that sort of grouchy authority figure that he's known for. Like, I was watching this movie and I was like, did Clint Eastwood's persona change at all from, say, 1980 to 2020? He's just exactly the same.
And he's the same character. He's
the same character these days, and he definitely carries the film. My issues with it, while I did enjoy it, is it's definitely got some issues with stereotypical minority characters, especially, and that's what I think you were referring to when you were comparing to, say, Sorry to Bother You and JoJo Rabbit, is that this takes a very old school, the military are hard, and we need hard men in the military, and if you're going to be a super macho man, you're going to be in the military sort of thing. And yeah, that is a form of propaganda in such a negative way as you would have seen in JoJo Rabbit, but that was what modern sort of propaganda was in especially the 80s and 90s. It was a lot of sort of the I Want You, Uncle Sam posters became sort of movies where they glorified really hardened battle veterans. And this was one of those, but Clint Eastwood sort of holds it, and I didn't mind it.
Yeah, I thought Paul was going to about the insults and why I liked it as a little kid, as a kid, especially the one that said you couldn't take care of a wet dream. So there's a few.
That was a good one.
I love those lines, but that was one of those things where I was like, not all those lines. I can't really use some of those lines.
That one's okay though. That one
Yeah.
is usable.
You couldn't take care of a wet dream.
There it is. That was the other bit too. I was like, am I watching Batman or am I watching a war movie? His voice was very Batman-like.
Yeah. And so, okay. And what did you think?
What did I think?
You were saying-
Yeah, what did you think, Adam?
Look, it was fine. I think that like the whole like macho man thing totally doesn't work as a propaganda in my mind because like I don't know, I there was nothing about this film that made me feel like, man, I want to go and be in the military because like it just seems like a terrible time with grumpy old men.
Just before you get off that,
sorry.
I'll just address that just before you get off that. But you got to think about the population that they are targeting. With this
Yeah,
sort of
yeah, of course.
propaganda thing. It'll be like undereducated, super disenfranchised. That's what this sort of media, in terms of its propaganda elements, would appeal to, not overly educated Australians.
Yeah, and I understand that, but like I think that's where my level of enjoyment sort of was hindered. Also, like this movie hasn't aged particularly well. When he walks into every bar and restaurant and just calls all the women sweetheart and just like it's like and I know that that's a thing at the times. And like I understand that, but yeah, I think like watching it with a 2020 lens and like this sort of like propaganda, like you see like how it sort of steered society in maybe a particular way, which I don't particularly align with. Sorry, you go. No, you go.
I was gonna say the bit that I did like about its sort of views on society is a lot of the time we do have those people that haven't been, and in this case it was to war, but haven't been out in the field or haven't done whatever job it is, but they sit behind a desk and tell people what to do. I didn't mind that little message how Clint Eastwood was against the other sergeant, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that was probably one of the strongest parts.
One thing
Sorry.
Oh, go.
No,
I was going to say, I'll talk to Paul about this because obviously he's a big Eastwood fan. I felt for a movie directed by Clint, it was quite boring from a directing point of view. Like, I think he might have been having trouble directing a film where he was such a focal point. And I think further into his career, he figured out that he's best used as a supporting character. Because I feel like a lot of the shots were literally just him walking into rooms and it just tracing his movement. And then we just got a front-on shot, and then it just followed him back out the room. Because when you're not sitting behind the camera, you obviously have a lot less control over the direction.
Yeah, there was a lot of, like, cinematography-wise, like, there was a lot of kind of weird shots. Like, this movie, going back and watching it, is so dark. There are so many shadows. Like, wait a minute, what am I looking at? Is that there's just not, like, there's so many just weird things like that. And then, yeah, you have him where, the amount of shots where it's him walking into a room and then head on talking, back and forth. Like the movie does get better whenever he's not necessarily, like, shot better, I should say, when he's not in the scene. When he's, when it's, you have, Stitch Jones talking to I'm blanking on the other sergeant's name.
The guy with the glasses?
Chuzo. The other, his, like, friend, his buddy.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the Sergeant Major, that's what it was. Sergeant Major Chuzo. Whenever, like, him and Stitch Jones are talking in the bar and, they're talking about Heartbreak Ridge and why it's called that and how Gunny got the Congressional Medal of Honor and all that stuff. Which then kind of was like, oh, that's why everybody's like, I've seen your record. It's ancient news. Your dinosaur, all this other stuff. It's like, oh, that's why.
I quite liked one thing that I was quite impressed by is like for a budget of only like 15 million, like it seemed like from my standpoint anyways, like the fact that like they had all these helicopters and like all these like ATVs, it was quite like impressive with what they were able to pull off. Like I don't know, I feel like that was all. Anytime that there's movies with that many like props and stuff, I always imagine them to be way more expensive. Sorry, you go.
No, I was continuing off that point. I think the only time that I noticed this, and I know I was talking to you and Paul about it before we started, was near the finale where they get into this massive war scene, but it looks like they've just run out to the local sort of paintball area with an open field and just started shooting at some bad guys. And that was a criticism I had. It was such a America good, everyone else bad. We've just got a bunch of bad guys we're going to go and shoot because they've done bad things to Americans, sort of thing. And that's another part where the propaganda comes from. It doesn't matter about who the enemy is. It's just as long as we're going to be fighting for good, in quotation marks. But speaking from a military, Paul, I'm sure this isn't I know you're in a different form in the military, but especially 2020, this is not the sort of idea that the army would want to get across on how they run things these days, I'm sure.
Oh no, and I think that was honestly what this movie touched on a lot. And I know you guys were, how he comes in there and he's just this old war horse, and they're talking about like this is a major powers. I would say the antagonist for most of it, trying to get him out of major powers' quote unquote Marine Corps. How this is a new Marines. We don't need people like you. You should be put into glass case that says only break in case of war.
Mm-hmm.
I ask for Marines and they send me relics, that kind of stuff. And his arc in this Major Gunny's, or not Major Gunny, but Gunny Sergeant Highway's movie is kind of like him coming to the end and not necessarily knowing where to go. Because, he starts in recon, does all his combat stuff, gets into some trouble, gets moved over to being a supply guy, which is what you saw in the beginning of the movie, where, there's like, man, if your eyes weren't so sharp and that pencil not so quick, we'd be able to make this very lucrative for you. Mm-hmm. And he's just like, get that contraband out of my face before it's so far up your backside, you got to light it through your nose. Some stuff like that, where it's just, you get the sense that he just is trying to do his best, and he's not trying to be, this dirtbag guy who wants to, ride it out till the end. He joined the military, during Korea. So he fought during Korea, fought during Vietnam, which is where the line that Major Powers gives to Sergeant Major Chozo, or Chuzo, were 0-1-1. Because they had yet to actually win a war. We had lost one and we had tied one. Mm-hmm. And so it was just one of those things where some people looking at it's like, you haven't won a war since the 40s. Like, you guys, brought up on that old school stuff. Like, get out of here with that. And it's showing that sometimes you need that old school mentality to get the job done. Because, wars aren't won by filling out reports and yada, yada, yadas. It's won by trained personnel kicking ass.
I found
one thing that I did.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I was going to say one thing I did find cool, like in terms of the movie itself and like what it was about, is like, sorry, I've got a very poor knowledge of obviously like war and all the things that have happened in the past. But the fact that like how they had to make that phone call to like call in an airstrike.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, how that actually happened, I'm pretty sure I read somewhere.
Yeah, so that's a legitimate thing that has happened before.
Yeah, I was like, wow, how bizarre.
Was that the battle for Grenada? Which is, was that what that
that was.
Yep.
I don't know if it actually happened in that one, but I think that was what it was supposed to be, because it was like Cubans taking American students hostages. And that was the, the battle they were going for there. But then, even with that, like making that phone call like that, but then even the other calls where it's like, hey, you've all been put on alert, you got to go. That stuff actually happens. Like that happened to me at the beginning of the year. Actually, at the end of last year, technically. I got a phone call at 7:30 at night being like, hey, I hope you're not drunk because you need to get to work. It's like, all right, yep, let's go.
Yeah, wow. But yeah, I just thought the phone call thing and having to have like the credit card to make the call was funny.
Yeah, they don't take collect calls.
Yeah,
that was the funny bit too. It's just like, it's an emergency and the lady's like, well, have you got a card? We're not taking this. You're like, geez, imagine if that actually, like, I mean, it did happen. Like, it's just ridiculous. I reckon
Also,
that was the best
imagine if
scene
they
as well.
didn't have a credit card.
Yeah. Like, well then.
I found it interesting. This came out a year before Full Metal Jacket because, in a lot of ways, it shares its structure with Full Metal Jacket in terms of a sort of more light-hearted first half that gets quite serious and dark through the second half. And I think it's interesting to compare the two films because you have sort of Full Metal Jacket that isn't viewed through a propaganda-ish lens and is more about the atrocities of war, and this that sort of does the same sort of storyline but ends with, but as long as Americans are kicking ass, it's all good sort of vibes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I found it interesting that the structure is almost exactly the same, but when you go back and watch Full Metal Jacket, even though it's only a year later, it feels so much more modern. And that may, again, just be due to the way we view war over the last 20 or 30 years and the way we view how some things may, yes, be a necessity, but they may not be something that we should glorify. But also due to the fact that this movie hasn't really been remastered at all, and you really got the old school 80s vibe. Like, it felt like I was watching an old school 80s slasher movie for a lot of it, especially in terms of the colourful cast. They all came across as the real caricature style characters. And yeah, it's that lack of realism that sort of put me out of it. But again, my childhood love of Clint Eastwood, I just can't get past him just growling times. Really makes me want to rewatch the Dirty Harry movies.
Yeah, there was one more because in this movie, because obviously I've watched this a whole bunch, so I've seen this and I've been able to analyze some of the storylines and some of the things that kind of get overlooked. Where he has the one guy who's going AWOL from time to time, and then it turns out it's like, oh, well, that's because he had to pick up a second job because the military is not paying him enough. Yeah, he's like, I've been trying to put in for all these things, but I can't get it, so I had to do another job to do this. And then he's like, all right, well, I guess we'll have to cut through some of this red tape. And he literally just hands him money out of his wallet. Like, this is on the, the Gunny Sergeant Fund. Don't worry, you can pay it back, yada, yada, yada. And, that thing is still a thing in the military where sometimes you have people who are like, yeah, they are picking up actual civilian jobs and all that stuff. And how sometimes trying to take care of your people, you have to kind of go outside the guys are squared away in that regard. Which then also fed into Aggie's plotline, his, ex-wife, that she gets brought up a lot. And then don't get me wrong, her, Marsha Mason, I believe it was, she goes over the top in certain scenes where, when they were at her house and she just starts throwing shit and yelling at him. It's like, okay, like, I get it, but like, god damn.
Yeah,
but it was like
female depictions in this movie were very old school, like very crazy. Clint Eastwood needs to slap a woman to calm her down style.
Yeah, but at the same time though, she did play that. She plays that role later on whenever she's talking about it, where it's just like, I have every right to be angry, be upset. Like while you were out there doing stuff, like I had to be at home checking the news, praying every day to see you, but then also praying that I don't see you. And then being in that mindset, and then how that will destroy. Like I've seen it personally, where people will take every deployment, everything they can get their hands on to, go out and do this stuff because, that's the job. That's what we signed up for. Meanwhile, their family is stuck behind, being like, look, I don't see you ever.
Yeah, and I think that that was like one of the bits that I probably liked the most about the film was like where you can see like Clint Eastwood like try to when he's in the car and he's reading like the Woman magazine. I saw that as like, wasn't he trying to like understand a bit more about like his wife and like.
Yeah, he's doing a bit of research, kind of understanding the enemy.
in the most 1980s male thinking kind of way possible.
Yeah, yes.
I gotta understand women. I'm gonna read a women's magazine.
Well, I mean, wasn't
he also like, nah, it's not mine. It's not
mine. Left those there. Like whenever he's talking to Stitch Jones and all that stuff.
Yeah, I just don't feel like they make these sorts of movies anymore either. And for like good reason, I feel, but like as in like even just the structure of it was quite.
Well, I like the fact that despite not loving the movie, I wasn't that bored through the whole thing. Like, it's still, when I got to the finish, I wasn't like, oh god, I'd hate to sit through that again. I was like, oh no, it was an alright Clint Eastwood movie.
Yeah, I was much the same. Like, I don't feel like I'll need to watch it again, but like it wasn't like the worst. It was fine. It was an alright time.
For some reason, it made me want to watch Predator. And I
thought that too.
I was
absolutely
thinking
thought
that
too.
We probably could have gone with something. Like,
yeah,
especially when they walk into when Clint Eastwood walks sort of bunk where they're playing pool for the first time. I was like, this is absolutely a Predator style cast of characters.
Yeah, exactly. All right,
that is something you would expect to see when you walk into a military, like you walk into barracks. It's just a hodgepodge of like just random people from different parts of the country who are all just like hanging out and bullshitting. Like, yep. I walked into very similar rooms,
and I think they're still doing that aspect of movies today, though. Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise does it quite similar to they do it here. Actually, I think
they do it in Edge of Tomorrow, another fantastic film that you and I can't shut up about.
Yeah, I know.
All right,
maybe we should just sign up for Scientology already.
Potentially, like Tom Cruise is the Ethan Hunt man of action.
Oh, you're selling it to me.
All right, let's call it there. That was Heartbreak Ridge. Paul, do you just want to plug yourself again? Tell us a bit more about who you are.
Sure.
Before we sign
I am your neighborhood Paul. I broadcast live on twitch.tv/FNHPaul every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and sometime over the weekend. Bringing you some of the very best in RPG gameplay, Hawaiian shirts, and bad jokes. Thank you so much, Adam and everybody else, for having me on today. It has been a blast.
Thank you so much for stopping past. If you're not aware, this is the Film School podcast. We go live every single Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time or thereabouts.
Give or take.
Yep. Next week, we are doing 2 films rather than the 3 films. And the 2 films for the week are Holidate, which is currently trending at number 2 on Netflix. And I can't wait to watch that one and make you guys...
I think you're the only one, Adam.
I know. I want to make you guys suffer through a rom-com. Well, I think it's a rom-com. But I'm excited anyway. It has an Australian actor apparently in it. And Emma Robertson.
Oh, yes.
Woo! And then we also are going to watch Arrival, which is on Amazon Prime if you're in Australia. So thanks so much for watching this episode of Film School Podcast, episode 17. It'd be great if you like and subscribe. And otherwise, we will catch you next week. Thanks so much again, Paul, for joining us. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Paul.
Easy.